Hello and good evening, and welcome to this webinar, which is presented by the Tyneside Irish Cultural Society and is part of our project on Tyneside Irish Brigade Memories. It's nice of you to join us this evening. If you're joining us later, you're equally welcome. This will be on YouTube, we hope, for several decades afterwards. Tonight we have a special guest, Martin Talbot, and Martin is the coordinator of the city guides here in Newcastle, and he's going to give us an introduction to the badges and ranks of the British Army in using the Tyneside Irish Brigade as an example. It's an introduction to the whole structure of the Tyneside Irish Brigade and what it actually was. You'll notice your video is turned off, but you will be able to ask a question, and your question will be lodged, and when you ask your question, we'll all come live again. So I think without further ado, we can go over to Martin now. And Martin, welcome. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thanks very much, Tony, and thank you very much for joining us at home. The purpose of today's session is to look, as Tony said, at the badges of rank of the British Army from 1914 to 1918. And just as a caveat, different regiments have slight variations, but I'll be focusing on what the infantry was like, which is what the Tyneside Irish Brigade was. They were infantry. I'll be looking at what the infantry ranks were at the time. And if some of you have been in the army or some experience of the military, most of the ranks are similar, if not the same. However, there are a few variations, so just be aware of that. If you are interested, you might want to take a screen grab of this. If you are interested generally in the Northumberland Fusiliers, or if you are interested in different projects, I suggest you take a picture of this. If you're interested in the territorials in the war, the Isaac Grint book is excellent, the Alan Isaac Grint book. If you're interested in the Tyneside Scottish or Tyneside Irish, there are two excellent books by John Sheen, which I would recommend. If you want some more general information about what life was like in Tyneside, Vanessa Histon's book is very good for the home front. Neil Story has a very good book on the Newcastle battalions on the Somme. If you want a general work on what life was like in the army, Peter Simpkins' work is very good, but also I've provided that link at the bottom right of the screen. That is a project, Northumbria World War I, and the soldiers who fell in the First World War from North Tyneside are recorded there. Their stories and their pictures are included. And some of those stories and pictures are included in tonight's presentation. So I hope you enjoy that, but do have a look at that if you do get a chance. So first of all, we talk about battalions, but one of the first questions that you might be asking is, what is a battalion? Well, a battalion is a military unit typically consisting of up to 1,000 men. Its actual number is 1,007 men, and it's commanded by a lieutenant colonel, and it's made up by several companies. By 1914, generally, there are 4 companies in each battalion, and those companies are 227 strong. And we'll find out a bit more about those as this presentation goes on. So in terms of the Tyneside Irish, when we talk about the Tyneside Irish Brigade, the Tyneside Irish Brigade consists of 4 infantry battalions. They are the 24th Battalion of the Northumberland Fusiliers, the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th. And I put in brackets which battalion of the Tyneside Irish they are. They all wear the cap badge of the Northumberland Fusiliers, and they are Northumberland Fusiliers, but they have a battalion identity which is a bit different. And the Tyneside Irish Brigade as a whole had 4,000 men at any one time, and across the entirety of the war, about 7,300 men served with the Tyneside Irish, with nearly 2,000 men paying the ultimate price over the course of that war. The Tyneside Irish wasn't involved in every single engagement in the war, and it was engaged just on the Western Front. But this shows you the major actions it was used in. The Battle of the Somme, that's the Battle of Albert, which is the 1st of July 1916. The Battle of Arras, which is Easter 1917. The Third Battle of Ypres, sometimes called Passchendaele. The First Battle of the Somme, which is actually the German, to do with the German Spring Offensive, and the Battle of the Lys. And just before I start the ranks themselves, I want to just show you collections of medals. Some of you at home may have had family who were in the First World War, whether it be the Tyneside Irish or not. And you may have medals for those particular relatives. The top left-hand picture depicts collections of First World War and Boer War medals. That's quite a common combination. So if it's got a B next to it, it's a Boer War medal. If it's a 1, it's a First World War medal. And if it's a G next to it, it's a gallantry award. The top left gallantry award there is the military medal. If you have relatives who served just in the First World War, they either got 3 or 2 First World War medals, depending on when they started to go to war. So if they entered France in 1915 or 1914, they would have the top right collection of medals. If they entered France in 1916, they would have just the 2 on the bottom. And some people, they serve in the First World War, but they also managed to serve in the Second World War. So some people have collections where First and Second World War medals are together. And just to give you a sort of an indication of what the British Army was like in 1914, the British Army in 1914, there were 450,000 regular soldiers. That's what I mean by full-time soldiers and reserves. In addition, there were almost 250,000 territorial soldiers. And in addition to that, 2.5 million men joined the war in service battalions, or they volunteered, and another 2.5 million men were conscripted. There's this sort of myth that when the First World War was declared, everybody went to join straight away in this mad flurry of patriotism. That's not true. Lots of men began to join the various battalions after August and September, when the British Army was losing a lot of soldiers. So that actually prompted a lot of men to join what was happening in Belgium and France, and when they realized that the British Army was suffering so many losses. And just as a sort of a side note, if you're ever looking at pictures of the First World War, and this is true of the Tyneside Irish and indeed any other regiment, generally the uniform gives away a rank. So on the right-hand side of the picture, this is an officer, and we can tell it's an officer because they have what looks to be a jacket and a tie, whereas warrant officers and other ranks and non-commissioned officers, they have this tunic which buttons right up to the top button. So what I want to say as well is that the British Army in 1914 was for its time. It's very rigid, hierarchical, and it's similar to the rest of society. And it's structured very well for 2 reasons: to achieve a mission, but also to mirror or reflect society. And there's a few things which you will see on pictures when you start looking at different ranks. You will see the chevron, which is on the arm, the pip or Bath star, which is on the sleeve, which denotes an officer, and crowns, which are on the sleeve, which are used by warrant officers and officers alike. And I'm going to show you some of those now. So I want you just to imagine now that you've joined the British Army in 1914. Well, your first rank that you're going to come to is a private soldier, who is an ordinary soldier. Now, if you're in the Tyneside Irish, you're in an infantry unit, your role is to serve as an infantryman. And later in the war, after 1916, you might have a specialized role. You might become a Mills bomber, or you might become a machine gunner. But early on in the war, your predominant role is as a rifleman. And in terms of how you can tell whether a private soldier is a private soldier by their uniform, they have no distinguishing marks. They have no distinguishing signs. So it's very easy to see them because they don't have any rank on their uniform whatsoever. Good examples of those on the left-hand side there, Private John Robert Bean, who was from the 27th Battalion of the Tyneside Irish, which is the 4th Tyneside Irish. And he was, in 1916, a 40-year-old, and he was a bricklayer from Tynemouth. He had a wife, Mary Jane Miller, and he was a father of 7 children. Now, on the 1st of July, 1916, he was killed in the Battle of the Somme, and his story is shared with the Tyneside World War I, the Northumbria World War I project, sorry. However, not everyone who joined the Tyneside Irish were from Tyneside. A good example of that is this chap on the right-hand side, Private Ernest Sykes, who was also in the 27th Battalion, although he would never have known Private John Bean. He was not from this area. He's from Mossley in Yorkshire, and he was a railway worker. Now, initially, Private Sykes joined the Duke of Wellington's West Riding Regiment, and because of an injury in which he nearly lost his foot, he ended up being transferred into the Tyneside Irish, the 27th Battalion. And in Easter 1917, he won the Victoria Cross at the Battle of Arras. And his citation read, "Despite this heavy fire, he went forward and brought back 4 wounded men. He made a 5th journey and remained out under conditions which appeared to be certain death until he'd bandaged all those who were too badly wounded to be moved. And he showed utter contempt of danger." And for that, he received the Victoria Cross, which is the highest gallantry award. There's a picture of that on your screen right now as well. He would go on, he would survive the war, and during the Second World War, he would actually serve in the Home Guard. And if you're interested in his Victoria Cross, it's actually on display in Alnwick Castle. And the picture in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen shows Private Sykes along with Private Michael Heaviside of the 15th DLI, and they both received their Victoria Crosses in Buckingham Palace in 1917, and they received it together, and somebody took a picture of those 2 gentlemen, one from the Durham Light Infantry and one from the Northumberland Fusiliers, and they received that together. And also Michael Heaviside also survived the war itself as well. So one step up from that is a Lance Corporal. And you can see there, I've given you a picture of what denotes them. It's a chevron. They have 1 chevron. A Lance Corporal would have the rank worn on their arm. And you can see that in that top right picture. You've got a picture of Lance Corporal Thomas Bryan. You can see the chevron very distinctly on his arm. And he was in the 25th Battalion, which is the 2nd Tyneside Irish. Now, if you're a Lance Corporal, you might have specialist training in one particular area. You might have a good deal of expertise in the army, or you might have leadership potential. The sort of things that you'd be doing in the trench on a day-to-day basis, you'd have low-level responsibilities. You might be in charge of a guard post or a series of sentry posts. And Lance Corporal Thomas Bryan again, just like Ernest Sykes, was not from this area. He was from Castleford, and he was a miner before enlisting. And again, at the Battle of Arras in 1917, he won a Victoria Cross. And this is what his citation says. Although wounded, this non-commissioned officer went forward alone with a view to silencing a machine gun which was inflicting much damage. He worked it most skillfully along the communications trench, approached the gun from behind, disabled it, and killed 2 of the team that were abandoning the gun. This machine gun had been a serious obstacle in the advance. And he's recognized by being awarded the Victoria Cross, and the King comes to Newcastle in 1917 and comes to St. James's Park to award various medals to various soldiers and their families, and he awards Lance Corporal Thomas Bryan his Victoria Cross there, and there's 40,000 people there watching the King there. Another person who's a Lance Corporal Scott. He was from North Shields, and he was a miner as well. He was a miner driver underground at Backworth Colliery. So that just gives you a flavour of some of the individuals who were there. Now, like Lance Corporal Bryan, Lance Corporal Scott was also at the Battle of Arras, but unfortunately Lance Corporal Scott died at the Battle of Arras. If you take one step up from that, a soldier with 2 chevrons is a corporal. Now, typically a corporal will be in command of a section of 12 men. And they will have the responsibility of those 12 men, making sure that they are their welfare is seen to, but also they may need to do low-level attacks as well at that level. Good example of that is Corporal Armstrong, who was from, this is where he lived, in Northumberland Terrace in Backworth, and he worked at Backworth Colliery. Now, he's quite interesting because although he's with the Tyneside Irish, he enters France in 1915. So most of the Tyneside Irish have the 2 war medals, but Corporal Armstrong has the 3 war medals. And in addition to that, he was awarded the military medal in 1917 as well. So a very sort of successful soldier, but at the same time, a corporal is someone which the other men must respect, and this corporal must be able to lead those men. And unfortunately, Corporal Armstrong in the German Spring Offensive in 1918 was killed, and his auntie was given his gratuity. So just to sort of recap, you can see here we've got a picture of some soldiers. They're not Northumberland Fusiliers, but I quite like this picture because it indicates the 3 various ranks that we've looked at. So just have a think. Number 1, which rank would that have been? Number 2, which rank would that be? And number 3, which rank would that be? Number 1 is a corporal. You can see 2 chevrons. Number 2 is a private soldier, has no rank on them, so they're a private soldier. And number 3 is a lance corporal. They have 1 chevron. So if you have 3 chevrons denotes that you are a sergeant. And a sergeant would have a great deal of responsibility for up to 50 men, dealing with the welfare of those 50 men. A good example of that is Sergeant Patrick Butler, who was a member of the 24th Battalion of the Tyneside Irish. He was actually Irish. He came to Newcastle when he was 3 years old, but he was born in Ireland, and he worked as a labourer in the northeast, and he had a wife, Sarah Ann. And if you have a look there on the map, which is just on your right-hand side, I've shown you in green, that's Old Eldon Square. and I've just given you a red dot. That is Lambton Court, which is just off Prudder Street, which is where Patrick Butler would have lived with his wife, Sarah Ann. It's no longer a street there now. It's been built over by Eldon Square Shopping Centre. But Patrick Butler, what did he do before he went off to war? Well, he would have helped to train recruits at Alnwick Camp. That's Alnwick Camp there. And also as well, I've shown you this picture of the senior non-commissioned officers of the 24th Battalion. PB denotes Patrick Butler. Now, on the 1st of July, Patrick Butler managed at the Battle of the Somme to work his way to the Lochnagar crater, if you know where that is, if you are interested in the First World War. If not, just type into Google Lochnagar crater and you'll see what sort of conditions he would have been fighting in, where he came upon his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Howard, who is just denoted there with CO, commanding officer. And he and another soldier managed to drag him out of a crater where he was sheltering, and Patrick Butler was shot by a sniper. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Colonel Howard died the next day, but that picture there is absolutely fascinating because you can see the commanding officer, you can see Sergeant Patrick Butler, and you realize actually how important their connection is, and actually how they tried to save one another. And Patrick Butler played the ultimate sacrifice in trying to save Lieutenant Colonel Howard. One step up from that is a colour sergeant. So a colour sergeant would be more senior than a sergeant, and they might be a platoon sergeant or a company quartermaster sergeant, so in charge of supplies and uniform. And you can see there that their rank is denoted by 3 chevrons and a crown. And a good example of this, from that same picture I've just shown you, from the 24th Battalion, Colour Sergeant Stevenson, and he was a company quartermaster sergeant. You can just see him there. It's very difficult to make out in some of these old pictures their ranks, but you can see 3 chevrons and a small crown just above it. One rank above that was the new rank of Warrant Officer Class 2, and they were denoted by a crown which was just on their sleeve, and it was a smaller crown, a fairly small crown. But what sort of jobs would they do? They would do the job of a company sergeant major or a regimental quartermaster sergeant. And 2 of those company sergeant majors are shown on that picture, and they are WO2 Batty and WO2 Errett. There they are there. WO2 Batty just on the left and Errett on the right. And possibly one of the most important people in any battalion would be the regimental sergeant major or warrant officer class 1. They would deal with the welfare of the battalion, and they would work very, very closely with the commanding officer. So in the 24th Battalion, we've already seen, I've told you that Lieutenant Colonel Howard was in charge. His regimental sergeant major or RSM was warrant officer class 1, J. Greeley. And there he is just there. And you can see his rank is very, very difficult to pick out, and very difficult to distinguish from other ranks that are on the sleeve as well. But you can just see what he would have on the sleeve would be the Royal Coat of Arms. So what we've talked about there are all non-commissioned ranks. In order for you to become an officer, you have to have a commission from the monarch. And your commission, once you've got that, you can become an officer. And the officer ranks are denoted by pips or Bath stars and crowns. And then the higher ranks will come on and see towards the end. But you can see there, we're talking about officers because of the type of uniform as well. It's very obvious when we're talking about officers as they wear what look to be jackets, shirt and tie. So I want to just talk about one of the groupings of soldiers. We talked about a section which a corporal would be in charge of. Well, 4 of those sections would be joined together into a platoon, and they would be commanded by a second lieutenant or a lieutenant. And a sergeant, such as Sergeant Butler, who we've seen already, would help that lieutenant with that job. A good example of that is Second Lieutenant Fields, whose family was from North Shields. Although they were from North Shields, he became a clerk at Somerset House at the Inland Revenue in London. And initially at the beginning of the war, he enlisted as a private, which was quite common, and then later gained a commission. He then joined the Tyneside Irish in March 1916. However, he was killed 3 months later in June 1916, even before the Battle of the Somme. So when we talk about soldiers being killed in 1916, it isn't just the Battle of the Somme. There are a lot of soldiers who were killed in the immediate period before that, between March and all the way up to June and July, before the actual battle starts itself. Another soldier who would be in charge of a platoon is this gentleman here, Lieutenant Fitzgerald, who was a member of the 26th Battalion, which is the 3rd Tyneside Irish Battalion, and he was in C Company. This was Lieutenant Gerald Fitzgerald, and he was the youngest son of Alderman John Fitzgerald, who was a Lord Mayor of Newcastle. Now, he joined his father's business after school, and then when war started, his father had started to help to promote the creation of the Tyneside Irish. So when Gerald decided he wanted to join the army, well, it was very obvious that he would join the Tyneside Irish as well. And on the 1st of July 1916, he was 26 years old. So 26-year-old, and he was in charge of 50 men. And he was seen calling to his men to come on and to come on to the advance. And unfortunately, Gerald Fitzgerald was killed on that first day, along with 156 men of that battalion. A further 300 and odd men were also injured that day, just from that battalion. So we've talked about the platoon, but if you put together 4 of those platoons of 50 men, along with a few other soldiers, you have the next building block of the army, which is a company. 227 men make up a company, and a major or captain will command that, and they'll be assisted by a company sergeant major. Good example of that is Captain John Finlay, who was from the 26th Battalion. His family were from Jesmond. You can see there, 13 Fairfield Road, Jesmond. He was a St. Cuthbert's lad, and he was a private soldier until 1917. And then he was commissioned into the Tyneside Irish, and he was commanding B Company in the Tyneside Irish as well, the 26th Battalion. And he received the news that he was being promoted to captain, and then a day later he was killed. So quite very, very unfortunate as well. And his commanding officer said this of him when he died in November 1916, which is just after the Battle of the Somme closed. As a soldier, he was magnificent. I've never had an officer more devoted to duty or who worked so hard. He didn't know what fear was, and he was always smiling and cheery, whatever the conditions. His company, in fact, the whole battalion, were absolutely devoted to him. I think I've never seen a man who was more loved by all who he came into contact with. Brave, smiling, and always thinking of others. He set an example for us all to try and follow. So some quite strong words there about Captain Finlay. And you'll find that commanding officers or officers will write messages home when soldiers are killed. And you'll find a bit of an insight into those soldiers. Sometimes those are published in newspapers as well. Sometimes, though, it was majors who commanded companies. Major Leather, for instance, he was in the 4th Tyneside Irish, was from Yorkshire. He was married to Mildred, and he had 2 children, Vivian and Anne. You can see they're fairly young during the First World War. And he was an old territorial. He'd actually served in Malta prior to this. He'd already retired. You can see there by his age, he was 48 in the middle part of the war. He'd already retired from the territorials, and once war started, he rejoined. He was one of 6 brothers, all of which were in the army. 3 of those brothers were killed and another was severely wounded. Major Leather is shown in this picture here, along with his brothers, and Major Leather is just on the right-hand side of this picture, the far right of that picture, and you can see all of the brothers there, all resplendent in their military uniforms. So each of those companies, which is given a letter A, B, C, or D, they are all joined together in a group of 4, and together they make a battalion of 1,007 men, and they're commanded by a lieutenant colonel. And that lieutenant colonel will be assisted by a quartermaster, an adjutant, and his RSM, who we've talked about already. And we talked about Patrick Butler earlier on, and the man that he tried to help save, Lieutenant Colonel Louis Meredith Howard, who was from the 24th Battalion or the 1st Tyneside Irish. I want to just talk a bit about him. He wasn't born in England, he was born in Canada. Now, Colonel Howard had been in the Boer War and had saved somebody's life, and that act of gallantry had allowed him to be commissioned. So in the Boer War, he wasn't an officer, he was an other rank, and he gained a commission as a result of that. And he served with the Royal West Surrey Regiment and the Leeds Pals before coming to command the 24th Battalion of the Tyneside Irish. And we've heard, unfortunately, he was wounded and later died on the 1st of July 1916. There's this myth about the First World War: if you are a senior officer, you're quite safe, you're not going to die. That's actually not true. And if you are a senior officer, you are expected to lead your men in large-scale attacks as well. One rank up from that is colonel. Now, colonel doesn't have a command appointment. They're a staff officer supporting a general, or they might have an honorary rank rather than an operational purpose. I've put a picture up there of Captain Sir Tom Moore, and he was, just before he died, made the honorary colonel of the Army College at Harrogate, the Army Foundation College at Harrogate. So you can see there, it's more of an honorary role in that sense. Now, I mentioned when King George came to Newcastle, he came to award various medals to various soldiers. And somebody took a picture of the king walking down Northumberland Street. Here he is in the Haymarket when he came to Newcastle. And you can see various soldiers who were standing on the Boer War Memorial. You can see number 1 there is a major. You can just see the crown, which is evident. Number 2 is a colonel. You can see 2 pips and a crown. And you can confirm that that is a colonel as well, as he's wearing those red tabs, which staff officers wear. So this is a colonel. I think that's absolutely fascinating to see the back of Percy Street, the South African War Memorial, in the middle of the First World War, where you can see the king there. So I've mentioned a few times that there are 4 battalions of the Tyneside Irish: the 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th Battalion, or the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Tyneside Irish. Each of those have 1,000 men in them. And together, when they all join together, they make a brigade. the 103rd Tyneside Irish Brigade. And the person who was in charge of that was Brigadier General Neville John Gordon Cameron. And he would be in charge of those 4,000 to 5,000 men. And although the Tyneside Irish have Irish connections, the man who was commanding them on the first day of the Battle of the Somme was in fact Scottish, who'd served in the Sudan and who would also command the Durham Light Infantry Brigade. You can see there a rank for a brigadier or a brigadier general at this time is just a crossed sword and baton. Nowadays, it's slightly different. One rank up from that is a major general. So I mentioned there the Tyneside Irish. They were 103rd Brigade. If you join 3 of those brigades together, 102nd Brigade is the Tyneside Scottish, and another brigade, 101st Brigade, you can make an entire division, which would consist of around 18,000 men. And the person who was in charge of this 34th Division, which the Tyneside Irish was in, was Major General Edward Inglevill Williams. Now, I mentioned that just because you're a senior officer does not mean that you're safe. The Tyneside Irish paid a heavy price on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. However, 3 weeks later, while Major General Inglevill Williams was recceing a position, he went just a bit too far forward and he was caught by artillery and he was killed. However, his wife recorded that Edward Inglevill Williams always talked highly about the men that he commanded, especially his gallant Tynesiders. So he had a lot of good things to say about the Tyneside Irish and indeed the Tyneside Scottish. One rank up for that is a Lieutenant General. You can see there you've got the crown atop, a cross sword and baton, and they would be in charge of 3, possibly more divisions. And if you put a few of those corps together, you get an entire army. So the Tyneside Irish was in the 4th Army. The 4th Army was commanded by General Sir Henry Rawlinson. And you can see there, you've got the crossed sword and baton, and then above it, the Bath Star or Pip, and then above that, you have the crown. A general could be in charge of a few 100,000 soldiers. And you can see there how that goes. You can see a different breakdown of it. So you've got the Tyneside Irish at the very bottom there. They were in 103rd Brigade, which was a part of 34th Division, which was a part of 3 Corps, which was a part of the 4th Army commanded by General Rawlinson. And it goes beyond that. If you have several of those armies together, you have to have somebody who's in command of that, and that's a field marshal. On the Western Front, there were several armies that were in operation, and so the person who was in overall command at different points was Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, who later became Field Marshal Lord Haig or Earl Haig. Right, I'll just take us back. Right, thank you very, very much for joining us today. I'm going to hand it back over to Tony, who is going to help select some questions for me.
Yeah.
Tony, are you there?
I am, and thank you very much. I'm just going to reveal myself. Thanks very much, Martin. That was absolutely brilliant. It was a really brilliant exposition of the whole subject. I'm waiting for some interactive questions now. I feel that we should do homework after such an exhaustive tour. But I mean, it's absolutely essential to, when we're doing a project like this, is the first introductory lecture of our Tyneside Irish Brigade Memories Project, and it's absolutely essential that people understand what we're talking about when you're mentioning various ranks. If you get your colonels and your sergeants mixed up, you're in trouble. At the moment, I don't think we've got anybody down to ask a question, but so I haven't got one on unless somebody wants to come up with a question. I'll have to ask Martin a question. Martin, just a banal question. Says we have the King George at the Haymarket there. Is the when he went to St James's Park, was that a special ceremony, or was it just at half time at a Newcastle United football match?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a football game. It was just to present those. However, football did continue during the First World War. However, one of the big things that took off during the First World War was women's football.
Oh my goodness!
Yes, so munitionettes, so people, so women who were working in the various armaments factories formed their own football teams, and actually they became hugely popular. Tens of thousands of people would watch that. But King George was just in the region visiting various factories and at the same time presenting medals. So there are a number of pictures of King George in and around Newcastle, and here he's dressed as an admiral.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Anybody got any questions? Any more questions? No? Well, Martin, these are, you mentioned quite a number of Tyneside Irish soldiers there, and very few of the ones you mentioned were actually born in Ireland, and some of them had very little Irish connection. Is that a general picture, or was?
In terms of what connections people had, you did not have to have an Irish connection in order to join the Tyneside Irish. It was just a way of attracting people who maybe came from a certain community, but there was no sort of requirement that you had to say that you were from Ireland or that your family were from Ireland, but it would attract lots of people who were from that community. It's reckoned that somewhere in the region of 10 to 40% of people in the Tyneside Irish and Tyneside Scottish had Scottish and Irish connections. So you don't need to have it. However, it might encourage you to join a group who you feel akin with as part of a community. So that is the principal purpose behind it. It's not to set any sort of barrier. And although they're Tyneside Irish, you'll find that actually a lot of them don't even come from Tyneside. People come from the various pit villages in Northumberland and indeed Durham, and as far south as around Manchester as well. We saw some individuals who were from Yorkshire and Manchester area. So that is quite common as the war progresses, that people aren't from Tyneside even, or even the northeast.
Nevertheless, I think it probably does reflect that at the end of the Victorian era and the Edwardian era, Newcastle had been a major Irish centre of Irish immigration. Of course, it was a prosperous place. We're not used to thinking of Newcastle maybe as a prosperous place in the last few years, but in the mid-Victorian boom and afterwards, it was a very prosperous place, wasn't it? And emigrants went to prosperous places. Do you think that's true?
Yes, and indeed, some of the things that that Newcastle became famous for, not just in terms of we think about coal, but in terms of armaments, in terms of engineering, manufacturing, the railways. The Irish community played a big role in that as well. So many jobs were needed in these industries. You needed to draw on various communities, and the Irish community, which began to come to Newcastle in a greater number after the mid-19th century, well, they were drawn to a lot of those industries which grew up. I think, is there a question in the
Yeah, we've got
Q&A?
one or two questions now. We've got one from North Shields, and it's from Tommy. He says, can you say something about the equipment the men would carry into battle? Well, thank you very much for that, Tommy. Yes. Equipment men would carry into battle?
Well, it would vary as to what their objectives were. But for instance, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the Tyneside Irish had a great deal of kit because it was expected that they would need that kit as they moved forward. So we're talking, tens of pounds, so 40, 50, 60 pounds for some individuals. Later on, as the war progressed, if you were in a specialist role and you had specialist weaponry and ammunition that went alongside of it, of course, you would have to carry that in an offensive operation as well. So that would be required. But generally, a soldier will always have their uniform, anything they can carry on their uniform, and then they wear a pack over them, which has lots of pouches around belts. We call that webbing. So you can have, I've got a picture of that. You can have food in that. You can have ammunition in that. You want to also have something where you can keep your weapons cleaning kit in there as well. You want to be able to keep everything quite clean and tidy. You might have a wash kit in there as well. You also might have something to keep your boots clean. You might also want to carry something for clean socks as well, because you don't know when you're going to get something new. So they can carry quite a lot. So there is what would be hanging off a webbing there. You can see the various things there. You've got a knapsack, haversack, various ammunition pouches, water as well is hugely important. When we think about the Battle of the Somme, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, what people tend to forget, the first day of the Battle of the Somme is not 24 hours. The first day of the Battle of the Somme is 3 to 4 days. So if you were out there on the first day of the Battle of the Somme and you were injured, or you are maybe pinned down by enemy fire, or you maybe go too far, you could be out there for 3 to 4 days, and you need to eat in that time. You need to have water in that time. You need to be able to take care of your rifle and everything that goes alongside it. So some soldiers on the first day were actually out for 3 days. So it's very, very exhausting, but they need to carry everything they need with them. And in addition to that, the most important thing that they're going to carry with them is to do with their weapon and the care of their weapon.
Thank you, Martin. Now, we've got going from that. Can we go back to the picture of the Haymarket? Because I've got a really awkward question for you, which you can answer with one word.
Go on.
Do you know the names of any of the soldiers standing on the war memorial at the Haymarket?
Do you know, I've just seen that, and I don't. There's a number of senior officers on the war memorial, and if I had more time, I might be able to, but unfortunately, I've not seen anything on the labels of the pictures which I've taken. So unfortunately, I can't identify anyone. Although I think the King and the Queen are there.
I think that's good enough for us. Thank you very much, Martin. I think well, this has been the first of a series of talks, and Martin will be back again in one guise or another as we roll on with the project. The Tyneside Irish Brigade Memories Project continues. We just launched it now this month in April, and we're going to go on for another year, and so all details of the project are there on our website. We've just got one more contribution from Diane in North Shields. Private John Robert Bean was my son's great-great-grandfather, so thank you for highlighting him, Martin. His son was also killed in action.
On the screen there, Private John Robert Bean. I believe Diane was involved in that project, which helped to highlight those soldiers from North Tyneside. And whilst we say, privates, that's an ordinary rank, they're an ordinary soldier, they still do have a lot of responsibility in terms of the care of themselves and the way that they conduct themselves in the battlefield, and on the front line, if they're in a trench, they're going to have to be on sentry duty continually for the time that they're on the front line. So although they don't have responsibilities for others, other soldiers might look to them, younger soldiers might look to them. Private John Bean, for instance, was 40 years old. I can bet that some of the younger soldiers would have looked to him, like an older brother or even a father for some of them, because he would be able to help take care of the younger soldiers in his section. So I think you can't really overstate the importance of older private soldiers in the British Army as well.
Thanks, Martin. I think we're going to sort of leave it now and go and wind up for tonight. But thank you once again, Martin. It's been tremendous.
Tony, can I just ask, Tony,
yeah,
what's our next event?
Our next event is on the 26th of May at 7 o'clock. It's Wednesday, the 26th of May at 7 o'clock, when James McConnell, who I should call Professor now, he's Professor James McConnell now at Northumbria University, is going to be speaking on the Tyneside Irish Brigade, its recruitment, and the political context that it served in, and something about the way that it interacted with events in the Home Rule Party in Ireland. And then we have another talk by James later on, and a talk by Heather Jones from London, who's going to talk about the aftermath and the civilian side on the home front. So we've quite a lot of things coming up and lots of chances for people to get involved, Martin, as we roll on. So don't hesitate, for those of you watching, to get in touch with us and join. There's all kinds of work to do, researching and all the rest of it. So thank you very much, and thanks for this evening. Thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you soon. As we say, the next one, the 26th of May, but it's ongoing every week. Okay. Thank you very much.